Welcome to True Wild West Love Stories, where every legend hides a heartbeat and every scar tells a truth. Thank you for watching True Wild West Love Stories, where every legend hides a heartbeat. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. And tell us in the comments, do you believe redemption still exists in a world like this? The sun had only begun its slow climb above the red mesas when the lone cowboy rode across the silent desert. His name, unknown to most towns he drifted through, carried little weight, for he lived the kind of life that left no trace except hoofprints in the sand. He had wandered far from the cattle ranges of Texas, further still from the dry border towns of New Mexico, and arrived now in Apache territory, where the wind whispered stories older than any man. He was not searching for treasure, nor for trouble, nor even for companionship. His journey had become a habit the way dust becomes part of a saddle. The West had a way of carrying men along like dried leaves in the wind, detached from everything except the vague promise of tomorrow. This cowboy, hardened by quiet years and lonely trails, believed he needed nothing from anyone. The land he crossed belonged to no map but to the Apaches, who had lived in those canyons long before cowboys carved cattle trails into the earth. The distant cry of an eagle circled above him as he guided his horse between towering red cliffs. The air smelled of sage, and the distant glimmer of water promised a resting place. After days spent moving without pause, the thought of water brought him to the hidden spring tucked between rocks and scattered brush. He dismounted and let his horse drink. The quiet settled around him, a kind of peace the West offered rarely and only to those who knew how to listen. He knelt to cup the clear water in his calloused hands, and in that small moment he believed he was alone. But the West rarely left a traveler unwatched. Across the spring, half shadowed by rock and sun, stood a woman. Her posture was steady, her presence calm, but her eyes held the fierce awareness of someone who had lived her entire life among danger, war, and wilderness. She was Apache, young, tall, her dark hair braided tightly behind her back, adorned with beads that caught the light. She watched him with the kind of patient intensity that made his hand instinctively shift toward the holster at his hip. She did not move. The wind shifted softly through the canyon, carrying dust and the scent of distant rain. The cowboy straightened slowly, keeping a respectful distance. He knew enough of Apache lands to understand that he was a guest here, tolerated only by the passive mercy of those who protected it. Her gaze deepened, studying him not with hostility but with something else, something he could not yet place. Her arms were crossed and the earth beneath her feet seemed as steady as her stance. She appeared unafraid of him, unafraid of his horse, unafraid of the gun he carried. He wondered how long she had been watching him. Though he was a quiet man, her presence unsettled him in a way he could not fully understand. It wasn't fear, it was something unfamiliar, something he had not felt in a long time. He turned to refill his canteen, hoping the moment would pass without conflict, but the woman stepped forward, her shadow stretched across the water, almost reaching him. She spoke a single sentence, though he did not yet know the meaning it would hold, nor how deeply it would entangle their fates. She spoke of a wife he did not have. She spoke as if offering herself in place of another woman who existed only in rumor. Her words, carried on the wind, shifted the air between them and changed the course of his wandering life forever. The cowboy froze, not because he felt threatened, but because he felt the unmistakable weight of something beginning, something far larger than a simple encounter at a desert spring. The land around them felt suddenly smaller, its silence sharper, as though even nature leaned in to hear what would come next. He looked at the woman and saw neither jest nor confusion in her face. She believed what she said, and she waited, not timidly, not with hesitation, but with the steady force of someone unafraid to confront her own desires. The cowboy's chest tightened with a feeling he had not known for years. He was a man unaccustomed to solitude, to drifting, to leaving places before they left their mark on him. Yet the woman's presence rooted him in place, anchoring him in a way he did not expect. Behind her, the desert breeze tugged at the fringe of her skirt and sent ripples across the water. The horse lifted its head, ears twitching, as if sensing the shift in its rider's heartbeat. The canyon felt both vast and intimate, a cradle carved by time, a witness to stories that men rarely told. The cowboy had known many people, most of them forgotten as soon as he rode past the town limits. But this woman, this Apache stranger, etched herself immediately into the fabric of his life, even before he understood why. He felt a pull toward her, quiet but unmistakable, like the steady tug of a current beneath a calm river. It wasn't simply her beauty, though she held the sort of strength that made beauty an afterthought. It was the conviction in her stance, the clarity in her eyes, the sense that she was not a passing stranger but a force the West itself had placed in his path. He wondered what she knew of him, what stories she had heard, what assumptions she carried. The fact that she believed he had a wife suggested someone had spoken of him, perhaps even followed his trail. But the truth was simple. He had no wife, no family, no one waiting for him in any direction of the compass. Yet somehow, the misunderstanding drew them together instead of pushing them apart. The Apache woman remained steady, her gaze never wavering. She carried herself with the authority of someone who understood both the dangers and the promises of this land. Her people valued truth, strength, courage, and loyalty. Her words meant something, something deliberate. The cowboy felt a quiet stirring within him. In that suspended moment it occurred to him that perhaps this land, this canyon, this spring had not simply been a place to rest his weary horse. Perhaps it had been a turning point disguised as routine. The sky above shifted to a deeper blue. The rising sun cast warm light across the rocks, illuminating the space between them. The cowboy felt the weight of his saddle, the dust on his boots, the years of wandering that suddenly seemed empty when measured against the intensity of this unexpected encounter. He did not respond to the woman, not outwardly, not aloud, but internally something inside him shifted, something that made him question the long miles behind him and the longer miles yet to come. For the first time in years, the path ahead felt unclear, not because he lacked direction, but because he said that direction might no longer belong solely to him. The cowboy knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever had just begun would not end easily. The Apache woman's presence wrapped itself around his solitary life, pulling threads loose in ways he did not yet understand. And as she stood before him, calm, unyielding, and certain of her own intentions, the cowboy realized that this meeting was not chance. It was the first step into a story far greater than anything he had lived before. The spring glimmered quietly between them, carrying the reflection of two lives about to intertwine, and the desert waited in breathless silence. The cowboy remained at the spring long after the Apache woman's startling words drifted into the quiet canyon air. Though she had stepped away from him and disappeared behind the curtain of stone and sunlight, the weight of her presence lingered like a shadow that refused to fade. He found himself unable to mount his horse, unable to leave the sanctuary of the water, unable to shake the sense that something in his life had shifted without his permission. The West had always been a place of movement for him. He drifted from town to town, ranch to ranch, always earning enough to survive, and never long enough to form attachments. His life was shaped by open skies, long nights by dying campfires, and roads that stretched endlessly across horizons. He had never imagined that a simple misunderstanding, spoken boldly by an Apache woman he had never met, would wedge itself into his thoughts with such stubborn persistence. As he refilled his canteen, he re-examined the canyon around him. The silence felt different now, no longer empty but expectant, as if the land itself knew that the encounter at the spring was far from over. His horse stam, ped at the ground, ears flicking toward the path where the woman had vanished. Even the animals sensed that the balance of the day had changed. The cowboy finally mounted up, but instead of turning back toward familiar lands or following the path he had taken into the canyon, he felt a subtle pull guiding him deeper into Apache territory. It wasn't curiosity alone, though curiosity had played its part. It wasn't desire, though the woman's strength and grace had carved an impression into his thoughts. It was something more instinctive, a sense that leaving without understanding the truth behind her words would haunt him far more than the danger of entering lands where he did not belong. The canyon stretched before him, wide at first, then narrowing into a path that wound between cliffs painted with centuries of sand and wind. The sun climbed higher, casting hard lines across the stone. Ravens circled above, their wings slicing the air. He guided his horse slowly, scanning for signs of movement. He knew enough of the Apache to understand that he was likely being watched even now, though he saw no one. Hours passed, marked only by the distant murmur of wind and the steady clop of hooves. The cowboy stopped occasionally to examine faint tracks, prints too light and deliberate to belong to a careless traveler. They led deeper, weaving through the land with purpose. His horse halted abruptly, sensing something ahead. The cowboy scanned the rocks and saw a figure standing atop a ridge, silent, unmoving, observing. It was a warrior, tall and proud, holding a spear decorated with raven feathers. The man did not descend, nor did he raise his weapon. He merely watched, making no attempt to conceal his presence. It was a warning, not an attack. The cowboy remained still, waiting or some signal. After a long moment, the warrior lifted his hand, pointing toward a narrow pass in the cliffs. It was an invitation, or a test. With caution, the cowboy nudged his horse forward. The pass opened into a wide valley, unexpectedly lush after the harsh stone corridors. Cottonwoods swayed near a winding creek, and wild grasses brushed against the horse's legs. Smoke drifted from the far end of the valley, rising from several small fires positioned near conical dwellings. The scent of earth, wood smoke, and a life very different from his own surrounded him. He stopped at the edge of the camp, knowing better than to enter uninvited. The Apache people moved about their tasks, tending to hides, grinding corn, repairing tools, caring for children. Yet many paused to glance at him. None approached, none spoke. He was a stranger in a world that did not welcome outsiders lightly. Then she appeared. The woman from the spring emerged from one of the lodges, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. She walked toward him with the same deliberate confidence she had shown earlier, neither hurried nor hesitant. The people parted around her respectfully, their eyes shifting between her and the cowboy. Her presence drew the attention of the entire valley, yet she moved as if she belonged to the land itself. She stopped several paces from him, her gaze steady. Though she did not speak, the message in her posture was clear. She had expected him. The cowboy dismounted, careful to keep his movements slow. He stood with his hands visible, understanding that this moment carried more weight than any he had faced on the trail. The woman studied him with the same calm intensity as before, though now there was something else in her eyes. Something softer, almost curious. She gestured toward a shaded area beneath a large cottonwood. It was an unspoken summons, an invitation for him to follow. He obeyed, feeling countless eyes tracking his every step. The cottonwood's branches swayed overhead, casting rippling shadows across the earth. It was a quiet place, removed from the activity of the camp, yet close enough for the people to watch. The woman remained near the tree, her posture composed. Though she still said nothing, the memory of her earlier words echoed between them more loudly than any spoken sentence. The cowboy felt the weight of those words again, though now the strangeness of them took on a different shape. He studied her face, searching for signs of misunderstanding, but the clarity in her eyes made it clear that she had spoken with intention. The quiet between them was steady but not uncomfortable. The cowboy realized that this was a woman who spoke only when necessary, a woman who measured meaning more carefully than most measured their footsteps. Her silence was not avoidance, it was deliberation. Slowly she turned, motioning for him to walk with her along the line of the creek. The water glimmered under the sun, weaving through the valley like a vein of silver. As they walked, she kept a measured distance, neither close nor distant. The cowboy felt a strange sense of calm settle over him, despite the unfamiliarity of everything around him. The people of the camp watched from afar, whispering among themselves. Some looked concerned, others intrigued. A few seemed wary. The cowboy could not decipher their expressions, nor could he understand their words, but he recognized the universal tension of a community evaluating a stranger who had wandered unexpectedly into their world. The Apache woman stopped near the creek, resty, her hand lightly against the trunk of a willow. Her eyes drifted to the horizon, studying something unseen. The cowboy followed her gaze, though he could not determine what held her attention. Perhaps she was remembering something. Perhaps she was weighing something. Perhaps she was searching for an answer within herself. He sensed then that her earlier words had not been spoken lightly. They carried a deeper meaning, one that connected to tradition, to expectation, to a personal truth she had not yet revealed. The cowboy realized he had stepped into a world woven with customs he did not understand. Yet instead of fear, he felt only a growing sense of purpose, as if some unseen hand had guided them both to this moment. As the sun lowered toward the canyon rim, casting long shadows across the valley, the woman finally turned back toward the camp. She walked slowly, ensuring he followed. People gathered near the fires, preparing for evening. The cowboy sensed a change in the air. Something was about to happen, something that would determine whether he would remain an outsider or become part of a story far larger than himself. The Apache woman's steps grew more purposeful. The camp quieted. Several elders emerged from their lodges, their presence commanding respect. The cowboy felt the shift, the beginning of something he could not yet name. The woman stopped at the center of the camp, waiting for the elders to gather. When they did, the valley fell into a heavy silence, and the cowboy understood that the next moments would shape not only his fate, but hers as well. The moment the Apache elders stepped forward, the entire valley shifted into a state of quiet expectancy. The fires crackled softly. The wind pulled gently at the hides of the lodges, and the murmurs, "Oh." Daily life faded until only the heartbeat of the land remained. The cowboy stood at the center of attention, but he felt a strange calm settle over him. He had survived storms, gunfights, and long winters in the mountains, but none of it felt quite like this. The Apache woman stood only a few paces away, her face composed, her expression carrying a kind of unshakable certainty. She looked neither fearful nor defensive. If anything, she seemed prepared, as though the path unfolding before them was one she had anticipated long before he ever rode into the canyon. The oldest elder, a man whose presence was as weathered and commanding as the cliffs around them, stepped forward. His gaze swept over the cowboy with the slow, deliberate weight of someone who had spent a lifetime reading truth, not from words, but from the spaces between them. His eyes held the wisdom of battles fought, treaties broken, and generations protected. The cowboy respected that gaze. He knew the elders did not see him as a simple wanderer. To them, he represented uncertainty, an unknown force with the potential to bring trouble or change, either of which could fracture the delicate balance of their people. His boots, his saddle-worn posture, his foreign tools, all of it made him an outsider in a land where trust had to be earned through action, not appearances. The elder spoke, and though the cowboy did not understand the words, he understood their intent. They were questioning her, questioning the woman who had approached him at the spring, questioning the meaning behind her unusual declaration, questioning why she had brought a stranger into their valley. The camp watched intently, their faces reflecting curiosity, concern, and the guarded caution of a people who had learned long ago never to assume. "Safety," the woman answered in her native tongue, her voice steady and unwavering. The elders listened as though her every syllable carried weight beyond the surface of meaning. The cowboy could feel tension in the air, subtle, quiet, yet powerful. She spoke with conviction, with the authority of someone who understood both her heart and the responsibilities of her people. Though he could not understand her words, he sensed that she spoke of him, not as a threat, but as something different, something unusual, something that mattered. When she finished, the elders turned their attention back to him. The cowboy stood tall, offering no sign of disrespect or fear. His silence was not submission but steadiness. He knew that whatever they decided, it would shape the course of his fate in this valley. One of the middle-aged warriors stepped forward, examining the cowboy's horse, saddle, and rifle with a practiced eye. They were inspecting him, not with hostility but with the scrutiny of a community that had survived countless dangers by being cautious. The cowboy felt the weight of their judgment like the pressure of a distant storm. Yet he held himself with quiet resilience. He knew that trust could not be demanded. It had to be earned through time and action. The elders spoke among themselves for a long while, their voices low and rhythmic, blending with the soft rustling of the wind. The cowboy sensed that this was a council, not a confrontation. A decision was forming, shaped by tradition and the woman's unexpected claim. Then, in a symbolic act, the oldest elder extended a staff toward him. It was not a weapon raised in threat, nor a gesture of expulsion. It was an invitation, an announcement that he was permitted to stay, but under watch. Their acceptance was condition. Their trust cautious, but it was trust nonetheless. The woman inclined her head in acknowledgement. The people relaxed slightly, though their eyes remained curious. Some whispered, others gestured subtly toward the cowboy. He had become a subject of interest, a presence whose story had only begun to unfold within their world. As the tension dispersed, the activities of camp life resumed. Smoke from the cooking fires curled into the cool air. Children chased one another across the grass, their laughter carrying a delicate contrast to the seriousness of the moment. Warriors repaired their bows or tended the horses tied near the river. Women prepared hides for tanning, their hands skilled and steady. The cowboy was guided to a small open area near the edge of the camp where he could rest. A few younger warriors kept a respectful distance, tasked with observing him. He recognized their presence as a protective measure rather than a threat. They were ensuring that he remained no danger and that he understood the boundaries placed upon him. The Apache woman returned briefly, though she did not stay long. She met his eyes only for a moment, long enough for him to see something deeper lingering beneath her calm surface. Determination, certainty, perhaps even hope. The cowboy couldn't be sure. She moved with the grace of someone who knew her place in the world and had no need to justify it. As dusk began to settle, the valley transformed into a shimmering canvas of gold and violet light. The fires burned brighter, casting dancing shadows across the camp. The cowboy watched these moments unfold with a sense of quiet awe. For the first time in years, he felt himself part of something larger than his own wandering existence. He thought of the woman's bold words at the spree. Words that had been spoken with such conviction. She had offered herself under the assumption that he had a wife, an assumption born from rumor, misunderstanding, or something deeper that he did not yet comprehend. He wondered what she had meant by it, wondered what she expected from him, wondered why she had chosen him among all men who might have passed through these lands. As the night deepened, the cowboy found himself lying near the edge of the camp, staring up at the endless sky streaked with stars. Coyotes called from the distant hills, and the soft murmurs of the Apache people drifted across the valley. He felt the weight of the day's events settling in his chest. For years he had lived without direction, following the horizon wherever it led. But now he felt something stirring in him, something unfamiliar and unsettling, a sense of purpose, perhaps, or the beginnings of a connection he could not yet name. He knew this land was not his. He knew he did not belong here. And yet the pull he felt toward the woman, toward the camp, toward the quiet certainty she carried, it was strong enough to outweigh the instinct to flee. The cowboy understood that whatever path he was now on, it was not one he could abandon without answers. The firelight flickered softly, casting patterns across the ground. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faint scent of sage, and as he finally drifted into a restless sleep, he sensed that the sun would rise on a day that would draw him deeper into the heart of this new world, and into the life of the woman whose words had changed everything. Night surrendered slowly to dawn, and the first beams of sunlight spilled across the Apache Valley like gold dust drifting from the sky. Birds stirred among the cottonwoods, the fires dimmed to glowing embers, and the hush of early morning laid itself softly over the camp. The cowboy woke to the cool bite of the desert air rising from his blanket with an unfamiliar feeling in his chest, an awareness of belonging mixed with the sharp edge of uncertainty. He had slept lightly, alert even in rest, but the presence of the Apache guards who had kept a quiet watch near him had offered a strange, subtle comfort. For the first time in years, he had not awakened to the emptiness of the open trail. He had awakened within a community that had accepted him only by the slenderest margin, but accepted him nonetheless. The camp began to stir. Women gathered near the creek to wash tools and prepare morning food. Warriors inspected their weapons, and elders moved slowly between lodges, offering guidance to those who sought it. Children ran through the grass with bare feet and laughter that reminded the cowboy of a life he had never lived. He watched it all quietly, absorbing the rhythm of a people whose world followed patterns shaped by generations. But he did not see the woman. The Apache woman whose bold words had drawn him into this place was nowhere in sight. Her absence unsettled him more than he cared to admit. He scanned the edges of the camp, searching for the familiar braid adorned with beads, the steady stride that carried a confidence unmatched by anyone he had ever known. He found no trace. As the sun climbed higher, one of the younger warriors approached him, not with hostility, but with the silent expectation that the cowboy was to follow. The warrior led him to a shaded area near the creek, where the elders often met. The cowboy understood then that the morning would not pass without another test, another judgment, another piece of the story unfolding. The elders stood in a semicircle, their expressions stern but not unfriendly. Their presence commanded respect, and the cowboy offered it willingly. He understood that his place among them was not guaranteed, that every breath he took in their valley was permitted only by their cautious goodwill. The oldest elder stepped forward. His voice carried the weight of a man who had lived long enough to see both peace and destruction, trust and betrayal. Though the cowboy could not decipher the exact words, he recognized the cadence. The elder was conveying the seriousness of the situation. This was not a casual gathering. This was a moment that demanded truth. And the truth they sought was simple, the story of the cowboy's supposed wife. The misunderstanding that had brought him here refused to fade. Though he had no wife, the rumor had taken root in the minds of the people, woven tightly into their understanding of why their own woman had made her unexpected claim. The elders needed clarity before allowing anything further to unfold. The cowboy stood in silence, his posture rigid but respectful. He could not explain himself with words they would understand, but his face revealed an honest emptiness on the matter, a life lived alone, untethered by marriage or commitment. The Apache people studied him closely. They watched the sincerity in his eyes, the simplicity of his expression, the unmistakable truth of a man who had wandered too long to carry the burden of a wife behind him. Gradually, the suspicion softened. The elders exchanged glances, silent confirmations passing between them like a quiet wind. They accepted what they saw, even if no words were spoken. The revelation shifted the balance of the valley in a subtle but profound way. The woman, still unseen, was now at the center of a story with a new truth. She had offered herself to a man who belonged to no other woman, and such an offering was no small gesture in Apache culture. It carried significance, responsibility, and consequences not only for her but for the entire community. When the council concluded, the cowboy was led back toward the camp. He sensed a change in how others regarded him. Their caution remained, but curiosity now mingled with it. The possibility of something deeper, something binding, hovered over the valley like a storm gathering in the distance. As he walked back through camp, he finally saw her. The Apache woman stood near the horse enclosures, her hands busy with saddles and harnesses, her posture strong and steady as ever. She did not look at him immediately, but when she did, the quiet understanding that passed between them tightened the world around him. Her eyes held a depth that suggested she already knew what the elders had learned, that the cowboy had no wife, no ties, no commitment that might bind him elsewhere. For the first time, the cowboy sensed the weight of her earlier words. She had spoken boldly at the spring, believing he was a married man, offering herself under an assumption she had now learned was false. Yet she stood before him with no hint of regret or embarrassment. She was a woman who did not back away from the path she had chosen, even when its course shifted unexpectedly. The cowboy felt the tension in his chest deepen, a tug he could not fully understand. Everything about this woman challenged the quiet isolation that had shaped his life. She carried a strength he admired, a certainty he envied, and a presence that unsettled him in ways he had never experienced. He watched her for a long moment before turning his attention back to his horse. He checked the saddle straps, brushed the dust from its coat, and tried to focus on simple tasks to ground himself. But the woman's presence lingered behind him like a gravitational pull. As morning stretched toward afternoon, life in the camp resumed its familiar pace. Warriors rode out to patrol the surrounding lands, women prepared food, and elders tended to matters of tribal importance. The cowboy remained on the outskirts, still treated as a guest, still watched by wary eyes, but now more integrated than before. It wasn't until later, as the sun dipped behind the peaks and cast long shadows across the valley, that the cowboy sensed something shifting in the air again. The Apache woman appeared from behind the lodges, walking toward the creek with a purposeful stride. The people noticed, their conversations halting, their attention drawn to her. She carried herself with the unmistakable energy of someone preparing for a significant moment. The cowboy, unsure of her intent, followed her path with his gaze. She stopped near the willow tree where they had first walked together, where the stream carved a gentle path through the valley. The elders emerged again. Warriors gathered. Women paused their work. The entire camp began to assemble, forming a silent circle around the space near the creek. The cowboy stood motionless, sensing that he was being summoned, not by a gesture, not by a word, but by the collective focus of an entire people. He understood with eerie clarity that the story was about to take a turn he could not have predicted. The Apache woman lifted her head, and her gaze found him across the distance. The wind quieted. The camp stilled. The moment waited, and the cowboy felt himself drawn, step by step, toward a truth that had been unfolding from the instant she spoke of a wife he never had. The air in the Apache Valley thickened with anticipation as the cowboy stepped forward, feeling hundreds of silent eyes fixed on him. The ground beneath his boots seemed harder than before, packed with the weight of history, tradition, and the judgment of those who had lived on this land long before he ever set foot near its borders. The creek whispered softly in the background, a thin ribbon of sound weaving through the tense quiet of the gathered tribe. The Apache woman stood near the willow tree, her presence commanding yet calm. The beads woven into her braids shimmered faintly in the lowering sun, catching glints of gold and scarlet as the sky deepened. Her expression remained unreadable, carved with the strength of someone who had stepped into this moment willingly, knowing the consequences that would ripple outward. The cowboy approached her slowly, aware of the circle forming around them. The Apache camp had come together, creating a living boundary of expectation. Elders stood at the front of the gathering, their weathered faces solemn, their stances rooted in the ancient customs they upheld. Warriors lined the perimeter, their posture protective, ensuring order rather than threatening violence. Women and children filled the remaining gaps, their curiosity bright but controlled. The cowboy could feel the gravity of what was taking place. This was not a confrontation. This was a ceremony, one shaped by tradition and significance he had yet to understand. It was clear now that he was no longer just a wanderer passing through. He had become entwined in a decision that touched the entire valley. The oldest elder stepped forward, holding a carved staff marked with symbols of authority and wisdom. The cowboy had seen weapons, treaties, and flags of surrender in his travels, but he had never seen a symbol carry as much meaning as this simple staff. It represented a lifetime of decisions, and now it would shape his fate. The elder spoke, his voice steady and sure. Though the cowboy could not understand the words, he recognized the ritualistic cadence. The elder spoke of tradition, of responsibility, of unity within the tribe, and of the significance of the woman's earlier declaration. The people listened with reverent silence, each understanding the gravity of what the elder pronounced. The cowboy's gaze drifted toward the woman. She stood tall, completely unafraid. She had not been coerced into this moment. She had chosen it. Whatever had compelled her to offer herself to him at the spring was now being formalized through the customs of her people. He felt the tension in his chest coil tightly. The elder turned his attention directly to the cowboy. Though the man's words were foreign, the tone was unmistakable. The cowboy understood what was expected of him. He was being asked to decide, to accept or decline a place within this tribe, a role beside this woman, and a life tied to a world he had barely begun to comprehend. The Apache did not make decisions lightly. If he chose to stay, he would be bound by their customs, their law, and their expectations. If he chose to leave, he would do so without hostility, but also without return. This was not a negotiation. This was a crossroads. The cowboy glanced at the valley around him, at the towering cliffs glowing under the last light of day, at the people who watched with solemn patience. He thought of his life before this moment. A life of wandering, drifting, surviving but never belonging. He had lived without Rue. For so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to be part of anything. He looked again at the woman. She met his gaze with stillness, offering no pressure, no plea. She simply stood as she was, strong, grounded, and certain of the path she had chosen. Her earlier words echoed in his memory, a strange invitation born of misunderstanding but now carrying the full weight of choice. The cowboy realized then that she had risked much by stepping forward in front of her people. She had exposed herself to scrutiny, to doubt, to the possibility of rejection. Yet she had done so with the quiet bravery of someone who understood that a life lived halfway was no life at all. He knew he could walk away. The trail would always be there, stretching out into the horizon like a promise he had chased for years. But he also knew that the emptiness waiting at the end of that trail was the same emptiness he had carried for as long as he could remember. He exhaled slowly, letting the weight of the decision settle into him. The elder raised the staff slightly, signaling the moment of choice. The cowboy lifted his chin, stepped forward, and placed a hand on the staff. His touch was steady, unshaken. The crowd inhaled as one, quiet, held breath, and then the elder nodded, confirming the choice the cowboy had made. A wave of subtle reaction moved through the camp. Relief, acceptance, approval, even a thread of celebration beneath the surface. The tribe had gained something today, not a possession but a commitment, and the Apache woman, her expression softened just enough to betray the slightest shift in her heart. Not warmth exactly, but recognition, a shared understanding. The ceremony continued with ritual motions that honored the new bond. The elders made symbolic gestures mark the cowboy's decision with traditional elements, passed down through generations. Warriors observed the ritual with respect, acknowledging him now as someone who had stepped willingly into responsibility, not as an intruder. As the sun dipped completely behind the mountains, the camp began preparing for the evening fire. The ceremony ended, but its meaning lingered in the heavy dusk. The cowboy remained near the willow tree for a long moment, taking in the final embers of daylight. He felt the shift inside him like a spark catching on dry grass, subtle yet profound. He was no longer a lone wanderer. He had placed himself on a new path, one shaped by a woman he barely knew but felt drawn to in ways he could not explain. The crowd began to disperse, though many still cast lingering looks his way. Some smiled faintly, others simply nodded. Acceptance came slowly, but it came. The Apache woman moved away from the creek, her stride graceful and confident as she walked toward the fires. She did not look back, trusting that the choice he had made would lead him where he needed to go. The cowboy watched her disappear into the glow of the campfire circle, feeling the roots of something new take hold in the soil of his once empty life. Night returned to the valley, carrying with it the beginning of a future he had never imagined, and in the quiet that followed, he knew that the final chapter of this story, the one that would define everything, was waiting just beyond the next sunrise. The dawn that rose after the long, violent night felt unfamiliar, almost foreign, as though the land itself were trying to remember what peace looked like. The high desert plateau lay quiet beneath a pale golden light, smoke no longer climbed from the canyons, and the thunder of gunfire had faded into memory. Yet in the aftermath of battle, the entire region seemed to breathe differently, slow, heavy, cautious, as if the spirits of the land were deciding whether to accept this sudden calm or brace for another storm. For Ethan Cole, the cowboy who had once ridden into this region with little more than a saddlebag and a restless heart, the silence brought a kind of weight he had never carried before. The memories of the previous night pressed upon him. The ambush, the burning canyon, the wild struggle to protect Tala and her people, and the brutal fall of Grey Hawk, who had thrown down his own life to give Ethan a chance to stand. Ethan had seen men die before, but never like Grey Hawk, never a death tied directly to his own existence or choices. And the burden of that sacrifice throbbed in him like a reopened wound. Yet the land gave no time for grief. After the dust settled, there came the necessity of tending to the wounded, burying the dead, and restoring what little could be saved. Ethan worked through the morning hours with a strange clarity, feeling partly like an outsider, and partly like he had been here all his life. The people moved around him with solemn purpose, but their glances carried something new: respect, acceptance, even gratitude. He had not come as an ally. He had not come as a savior. He had simply acted when fate pushed him to the edge, and for people who valued deeds over words, that was enough. Somewhere beyond the cliffs, Tala walked among her people, checking the injured, guiding the elders, speaking softly to children who had witnessed far more than they ever should have. Even from a distance, Ethan could sense the shift in her. She stood with a firmer posture, carried a heavier responsibility, and yet there was a deeper calm to her movements. Greyhawk's final trust had reshaped her, just as the night had reshaped the entire tribe. By midday, the sun had climbed high above the canyon rim, casting long rays across the sandy riverbed. Ethan stepped away from the others, needing a moment to gather his thoughts. He followed a narrow path along the hillside, pausing when he reached a ledge that overlooked the entire settlement. From there he watched the scattered figures moving with slow determination, repairing, rebuilding and reorganizing, a community struck hard, yet not broken. He wondered what place he held in any of this. He had been a drifter when he arrived, a man searching for answers he could never quite define. And though he had found meaning here, found connection, found something he never expected, he could not ignore the truth echoing in the back of his mind. This was not his land. These were not his people. He had no claim to stay. And yet the thought of leaving, of riding away into the unbroken horizon, tightened something deep in his chest. As he stood staring out at the recovering camp, he felt a light presence behind him, a soft shift of the earth, a whisper in the wind. It was Tala. She approached quietly, almost cautiously, as though unsure how he might receive her. For a long moment she simply stood beside him, taking in the view with slow, steady breaths. In the stillness between them, he sensed all that remained unsaid. Her tribe had lost warriors. Her people had lost a leader. She herself had lost the man who raised her, the man who taught her strength and guided her path. Yet she carried all of it without collapsing under its weight. And somehow, in the heart of that unspoken resilience, Ethan felt something else, something deeper, something binding. She had chosen him, not with words or declarations, but with loyalty, trust, and a certainty that had changed his fate as much as he had changed hers. Later, when the sun softened and the shadows stretched long, Tala gathered the tribe for a ceremonial farewell. The air smelled of sage and smoldering cedar. The people formed a wide circle, honoring Greyhawk in silence, each offering their grief in their own way. Ethan stood at the outer edge, not wanting to intrude, yet unable to look away as Tala stepped forward. She carried a single white feather, the symbol of a warrior's last journey. She placed it beside Greyhawk's belongings, his bow, his stone knife, his medicine pouch, and lowered her head. The flames flickered, reflecting in her eyes. In that moment the weight of leadership visibly settled onto her shoulders. She was no longer the fierce young woman daring a cowboy to prove himself. She was now the anchor of her people, the one who would guide them through whatever storms came next. When the ceremony ended and the fire dulled into glowing embers, the tribe slowly dispersed, leaving Tala and Ethan standing in the fading light. The air grew cooler, and a deep quiet settled over the canyon. He felt a shift in her energy, a heavy mix of exhaustion, relief, and an emotion he could not fully name. The night deepened around them, as they returned to the smaller ridge where Ethan had stood earlier. A faint moon rose behind a veil of drifting clouds, casting silver beams across the terrain. The soft rustle of wind through mesquite trees made the world feel timeless, suspended between sorrow and renewal. Tala stood near a fire she had rekindled, letting the warmth spread across her palms. Ethan watched her from across the circle of light, noticing the tired slope of her shoulders, the quiet determination in her gaze. She seemed lost in memories, of Greyhawk, of the battle, of everything that had shifted in a single night. In the fire's glow, Ethan felt a realization settling deep in his bones. He had come here a wanderer, but he was no longer drifting. He was anchored, to a place, a people, and a woman who had walked into his life like a storm and changed the course of it forever. Whatever future waited, it was no longer a future he could imagine alone. Even without words, the warmth between them grew. She stood near him, close enough that the heat of the fire balanced the chill of the night. The bond they shared, formed through danger, through trust, through the unspoken pull that had drawn them together, felt stronger than ever. When the moon climbed higher, Tala finally lifted her gaze. She looked toward the horizon, toward the open desert, where Ethan had once intended to ride away. Then she looked back at him, as though silently asking what path he meant to take now. But the truth had already taken root inside him. He was not leaving, not because he was obligated, not because he felt trapped, but because the land that once felt foreign now felt familiar. The people who once looked at him with caution now looked at him with acceptance. And the woman who once offered herself as a second wife to a man she thought was already bound had become something far more than that. She had become the one soul who could quiet the wandering in him. Hours passed as they sat by the fire, the flames slowly shrinking, and in the quiet of that final night, Ethan felt peace settling over. Peace he had chased for years but never found until now. When dawn approached once again, and the first rays of sunlight touched the stone ridges, Ethan knew his wandering days were over. He had chosen his place, and Tala, watching the sunrise beside him, seemed to understand that without a single word spoken, the cowboy who had arrived alone would not ride away alone. The Apache woman who once dared him to accept her presence now stood beside him as his equal, his partner, his unexpected destiny. And the story of the man with no wife, who met a woman willing to become one, ended not in confusion, but in a bond stronger than either had anticipated. For in the Wild West, some love stories were not born from gentle beginnings or tender moments, but from fire, danger, courage, and fate. And this one, etched into the canyons of the land, was destined to endure beyond the rise of the sun.